Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Center for Applied Coaching and Sports Sciences second town hall meeting on April 23rd, 2020. My name is Kristen Diefenbach, and I'm the director for the center. And today we're going to be talking about coaching from a distance, taking a look at some of the useful apps that coaches are using, particularly coaches who are really working hard from the sports science perspective and really integrating those things into their practices, and how they're using some of the apps and websites both in their coaching at large and the work that they do, but also in this time of trying to stay connected with our athletes from a distance. Just a few logistics for anyone who is new to town hall meetings or to using Zoom. Everyone's mic is muted. That's not a presenter, just to alleviate background noise. We are recording these, and these will be posted to the center website within 1 to 2 business days for you to share or listen to again. The chat feature is down at the bottom of your screen, and you may use that to post a question at any time. We'll be striving to answer those questions at the end of the panel and allow for some of that conversation to happen. And then one other thing that athletics just asked me to mention, WV Athletics asked me to mention, is that these calls are really designed for coaches, parents, and sport leaders, and that from an NCAA recruiting perspective, there is a request that athletes not listen to this as a solo signed up individual, and that they listen to the recording instead, just from a compliance issue perspective. And I said I would mention that for the sake of the compliance concern among us. So with that, today we have a really exciting panel. We've got Dan Stratford, who is the WVU Mountaineer men's head soccer coach, brand new to the program as a head coach, but returning Mountaineer with having his undergrad and his master's from WVU, and we're excited to have him back. We've got Josh Nelson, who has his PhD from WVU in the Coaching and Teaching Studies department with us, and he is now at Penn State University as the Assistant Athletic Director of Applied Health and Performance Science, and hopefully I got all that right. It's quite a mouthful these days. Dr. Guy Hornsby, who is an assistant professor in athletic coaching education, and Dr. Mike Ryan, who is the athletic coaching education program coordinator. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Coach Stratford to tell us a little bit about his practices.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, firstly. Today, just wanted to share a couple of things that we do within the program that perhaps have been emphasized in light of our current crisis and pandemic. I'm not going to speak in length really about specific apps. With us having, with us being a team sport, there's not a great deal that we can do in that regard. There are a couple of apps that we've recommended that the players download and utilize between Map My Run and MyFitnessPal. Map My Run essentially is exactly what it says. You can utilize their GPS software to track your runs, and obviously from that standpoint right now we have to be a little bit careful in relation to compliance as to exactly what they're permitted to do. And then from MyFitnessPal, it's probably more on a personal standpoint, but certainly some of the players use it from a nutritional perspective, just to make sure that again, they're not so much counting their calories, but looking at the quality of what they consume from that standpoint. As far as other little tools that we utilize within the program, one website that we use regularly, and this will be throughout the season, is a website called touchtight.com. I'm just going to slide my screen over so that you can see. This is essentially a website with numerous training tools and training ideas specific to soccer. So again, dependent on the periodization of the season, the time of the year, we may utilize this website to come up with some ideas. Again, there are numerous sessions on here, everything from formations to more drills in that regard in terms of warm-ups and things of that nature. Probably where I would say we utilize it the most, if we're not looking for an idea, then it's actually in our construction of our session itself. So there is a session planner feature, and that allows us to determine what type of layout we're looking for, whether it be a full pitch, a smaller area. We can also mark an area from there, and as you can see, I've already started one here as well, but we're able to add both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional players, personnel, mannequins, cones, balls, things of that nature. We can even label the players as well, which is incredibly useful. From here, I elect to screenshot that page and then drag it into what we have as our template for a training session. And I'll show you just maybe one example here right now. So those images are then cropped into a spreadsheet template. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to Excel. That's what I use for my template every single day for practice. This is just one, but the actual spreadsheet itself would be able to show you every single training session that we would have had throughout, obviously, the course of this spring. But this is something that I've utilized for about 6 years, and it's developed from there. I think that my background within the PEAT program at WU really emphasized the importance of planning and the importance of a good session plan, or lesson plan, as we would have called it at that time. So again, I think that it really becomes very, very useful as a log, as a journal of all of our practices and our sessions. And certainly when we're looking back through what we've done, we can look chronologically, and we can also look at sessions that have been successful. At times we'll go back into the spreadsheet and just make comments on what was successful, what was perhaps something that we needed to improve within the session. And this would have been, an 80-minute practice. It looks like on the day we were looking at sustaining the attack and some ideas on some pattern plays and things like that. I'll try not to get too tactical for you. There's one other additional, if you like, template that is very, very new to the program. In fact, it hasn't actually gone out to the players yet. It's been in conversation for quite some time. This is something I utilized at my previous institution. We refer to it as a student athlete profile or player profile. Again, you can see it's in Excel. And this is something that every single player has. This initial page is just very much general information for the player. Again, pretty simple to put together. I'll be honest, it's taken me some time to maybe make it look the way it does, but you could have a far more simple template than that. I think the piece that is perhaps most interesting for me is when we look at our players' specific profile. So each player will have a profile based on their position, where they play. This particular player is an attacking player. You'll notice with Instat and StatSport, these are two completely different softwares that the program utilizes. StatSport is a GPS software, and Instat is a match analysis software. So we're able to pull data from previous games or the previous season, which is what we've done in this case. And then lastly, their criteria, their attributes as a player. So within soccer, it's pretty traditional to break the game into, or development into, a four-corner model. And we look at the technical aspect of the game, the tactical aspect, their physical profile, and then their psychological, social component as well. So in each category, there are 10 criteria. And this isn't actually something that I fill out or the staff fill out. This is something that the players will fill out themselves. And as you can see, as they go through there, they'll start to develop a score and maybe generate the type of player that they may be. So maybe they're a very technically competent player. And that then hopefully leads to a conversation between the player and the staff as to, okay, where are some areas that we can work on, some areas that we can develop for that player, and give us a bit of an action plan as it pertains to their development. We turn this into a bit of a one-stop shop because we went to the trouble of adding their academic schedule that, again, they will add their credits, so their progression. You can really do anything you'd like. This would probably work within a high school format as well. But again, it doesn't necessarily need to look quite like this, but this is a profile that we'd like to see stay with the player throughout the course of their 4 years with the program. This particular page, for example, we'd look to have them fill it out before the season, at the end of the season in December, and then again in April. Again, in light of the pandemic, we plan to send these out here within the week. But again, we felt it would serve as a nice one-stop shop for their overall progress, some general information, and then the athlete profile as well. So where do they perceive themselves as a player? And I think that's been very, very interesting to have the players take the ownership in relation to this feedback and see where they perceive themselves to be. It can be one of three outcomes. They're either very honest and quite realistic about where they are as a player, Of course, at times you have delusions of grandeur, and perhaps the player perceives themselves further along than the staff. And then what has been quite interesting and perhaps more alarming has been the self-esteem issues if players have rated themselves very poorly, very low, and the staff have disagreed. But two relatively simple tools that, for the most part, we've developed in-house. And with that, Kristen, I'll leave it back to you. Kristen, I think you might be muted.
Yes, I was. I was having a lovely conversation with myself. First off, I thanked you. I appreciate everything you shared with us. And I think it's such great information to see how coaches are working and keeping track and doing some of those things. So I really appreciate that. From a housekeeping perspective, I also just wanted to let people know there's a chat feature at the bottom. If you pop it up, we're trying to keep the links that coaches are mentioning up as we go through so that you can keep track of those and see those. So now we'll sort of turn our attention over and spotlight Josh Nelson, Dr. Josh Nelson at Penn State, and let him tell you a little bit about the work that he does up there and the apps and programs that they use.
First off, appreciate you guys having me on here. It's great being a part of conversations like this because I think everybody right now is kind of having similar conversations like this. And, a little bit about kind of how we approached it. Our department, I'm part of a program called Sports Performance, and that's a unit with sports science, strength and conditioning, athletic medicine, sports psychology, everything involved in that, much like other places have. And, we're going to be involved in a lot of different parts of one, athlete health and wellness, but then two, finding a competitive advantage for, performance. So when everything kind of started coming together, we started IDing potentially plans for what we could do to keep our athletes, active, as active as we could to maintain what we had, and then two, create a plan to return us to campus whenever that may be. It's probably similar to what everybody in the world honestly is doing right now. We identified two areas. One is now, and then two is the ramp up period. So now we need to focus on making sure our athletes are taken care of. So that's where a lot of the apps are coming in. That's where a lot of the communication is coming in. And then the ramp up is just using great or sound practice, much like a lot of coaches are already doing, but just it's a great opportunity for us to reinforce that. How do you manage workload amongst athletes? How do you progressively build them up without creating too much too soon? So that's just kind of a foundation of what we've worked with here. We have 31 sports here. We have probably put a little bit more emphasis on the sports that are starting in the fall because of the immediacy of that. It does not mean that we are ranking sports or putting more importance with them. It's just, it's the time of the year. We're hoping that everything falls. We need to play that fall season if it's the best thing for our athletes. So we're putting some attention there. But the biggest thing that we're trying to do is reach our athletes now to make sure that we can close the gap where we are now and where we're going to be when it's there. Some different apps across our department would be, I know somebody's going to talk about this, so I won't steal your thunder, but like Team Builder, a couple of our teams will use that. And another platform is Elite Form. So Elite Form is basically a velocity monitoring tool, bar velocity monitoring tool that we'll have on our racks. And what they've actually done is they've been a really good proponent of opening it up for us for our programming. So even though our athletes don't have the system at their house or at their home gym, Elite Form has allowed our strength coaches to still program and push it to the athletes' phones or their tablet. So that's been a big thing. We use, as simple as it is, Google Forms, Google Docs, with some of our wellness questionnaires and just pushing out education, staying in contact with our athletes. I think this shows a lot of my bias, but, the sports pedagogy standpoint from teaching comes into play here. So we use a lot of that type of software to continue to assess what we're doing, get athletes to really buy in, understand what they're doing from a wellness perspective. And then we use video and social media from that educational standpoint. We're trying to target coaches, support staff, our athletes with just different means of content pertaining to health and wellness, performance, And this is not anything different than we do on campus. It's just, our team talks that may occur on the 50-yard line after football practice are now occurring on Twitter. So it's just a different platform. With the wellness metrics and creating data from athletes, I think one thing that all of us are kind of at the college level are running into is the idea of CARA, accountable athletic related activities. There's some things that can be reported and things that cannot be reported. So we've had that conversation quite a bit recently. We see technology as tools. No tool is going to be the same. Every tool is designed for a specific task. So, where some of our sports may use GPS on campus, maybe they're using heart rate now to program out. And then looking at trying to find, common language that we can talk to potentially. Maybe it's the NCAA, or maybe it's just looking at legislation of being able to have access to that data now, because it could be a good, impactful thing for, teaching our athletes and make sure they're safe. But that's kind of what we're running into with restricting some of our apps and using technology from that standpoint is just it violates some of the CARA hours. But then, the last thing I'll talk about is there's some specialty sports out there. So, sports that are in water, for the first time in a long time, they're probably out of water. So we're trying to research some different ways there. It's not technology per se, but what are some ways that we can approach those sports? Our throwing sports, it could be the same thing. I'll take baseball, for example. Maybe not the case, but there's still a potential for that some of those athletes at this level could be playing summer ball somewhere, and they may have to ramp up fast. So we're just trying to stay in contact with them. But just kind of in summarizing everything, I think the biggest thing we've been pushing is just continuing to have a presence with our athletes. Reached out to some people as soon as this happened, the pandemic happened, and the biggest thing that they said from an online instruction was have a presence, with your athletes. Make sure we keep bringing people together. Some people argued with me originally, but sometimes it seems like having a presence at the expense of great content is probably better. So don't wait on making it perfect. Just have a presence in this time. And then we can stay active with our athletes and then get athletes to, make sure that they take ownership in what they're doing. But that's just kind of a quick synopsis of kind of what we're doing. We're still trying to monitor our athletes, but at the same time, our philosophy has not always been about just the technology. It's about using technology to teach our kids to take ownership in their own training experience. So we've kind of really hung our hat on that.
Great. Thank you, Josh. I think that's such an important message too, the idea that the connection matters the most, and that we really want to make sure that there is some sort of purpose to the technology that we're using, that we're bringing it in with an intent and using it not just because we've got to do something, but thinking about why. And so with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Hornsby to talk a little bit about the work that he does. And again, Dr. Hornsby, I didn't mention before, and I should say, is also the WVU weightlifting coach and has been for many years and works quite a bit in that area. So in addition to his academic work that he does within the college, he has quite a bit of strength as a coach himself.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for having me. I think these discussions are really important. And actually, like with the weightlifting, so I work with WVU athletes much more in a role of sports science athlete monitoring. But what I really wanted to focus on was as a coach myself and with our lifting club. And one of the things I wanted to open up with was just the sharing the experience. Everyone has their own experience with when this all started to come about and kind of the planning ahead and all of that. And I think, so unlike the stuff I do at WVU, I'm almost always working kind of solo and with very little money and very low tech. And then weightlifting, it's an interesting sport in that it's not in the NCAA, but it's in the Olympics. So you'll have some pretty serious, pretty committed athletes, and we have several that are at national level. It's also really unique, even for it being an individual sport. Our calendar is, it's not like a track and field or swimming or something like that. The national meets are very scattered just throughout the year. So you pretty much go from like one macro cycle to the next throughout the year. And depending on if it's a youth lifter, a junior lifter, a senior level, all of our meets just kind of depends on different lifters are peaking for different meets that are at different times. I think with the pandemic, one of the unique things with weightlifting also is, so my first probably week or so, you know, I'm looking ahead and I'm seeing we're going to be out of the gym for a while probably, and one of the nice things about this sport is you don't need a whole lot to do a lot, and you can even do. Josh gave the example. Swimmer, you now can't swim most likely. You can actually even do what you do in competition if you have a barbell and bumpers and a platform. And like the first week or so, a big focus was I was scrambling all over the place to get kids equipment wherever they were going to be. And it almost became like a game to me of trying to figure out whether it was a couple things from CACSS. Most of it was from our gym. The owner was nice enough, and we actually own quite a bit of our own equipment. I loaned out stuff I have. And it really kind of became this constant. Josh mentioned the sort of the communication. It doesn't have to be all that well planned out and super pretty, but just it became a communication for honestly a week and a half of like, this is what everybody has. People were sharing, oh, I have 2 of these, you can have this. We had four lifters that actually built their own squat racks just from wood and cement buckets. But then, you kind of get past that, and then you got to go into just, okay, we're trained. I think that for all these types of situations, networking is super helpful, right? And so I think the most helpful conversation for me was with a good friend of mine, Aaron Kunanen. Aaron is a very accomplished weightlifting coach. He did that a long time with a 3-time Olympian along the way. He now is actually in professional baseball. He's a sports scientist for the San Francisco Giants. And one of the things he told me is we really we're not trying to emphasize to them that training has to go well. We're emphasizing the safety health part, but that from a monitoring standpoint, when they get back, we really have to have a good idea of where they're at, especially for a sport that could start at any time now. And one of the things that made me think of was, some kid might not have a squat rack, might not have weights that can be dropped. And I could start to think about this feeling of like, that athlete then comparing themselves to the athletes that do have things. And if you're a lifter that recently competed, we had several that compete at national universities, junior nationals, they're probably more okay with, I got about a year before my next big one. Some were looking at a national meet this summer. And so really looking at all the individual situations. In terms of apps, Josh mentioned Team Builder, and I'm lucky enough to have a very small, I have to teach classes with, but I can also use it for my weightlifters. And that is a great one for volume load, intensity. You can put the exercises in there for them. They can fill it out. But ones I think I wanted to mention more is a website called Sportably. It's the word sport, SPORTABLY. A good friend of mine, Jeremy Gentles, created that years ago. I used it for both my master's thesis and my dissertation because we had no money and we wanted to make something. And it is only, there's not an app. It never got to that stage, but you can use it in your browser, so you can use it on your smartphone. It is, the nature of it being free, it's a little bit more tedious. It's a little bit less tech friendly and pretty, but you can do everything from exercises, sets and reps, load. You can graph out. There is pretty much every psych-soc questionnaire out there, except maybe for some of the newer ones. Everything from rescue to palms and all of that. I keep it to like 5 questions. It's not even one of those. And then I have an Excel sheet that I made several years ago as part of my dissertation. I actually measured for 6 months worth of exercises for all our lifters, how far the barbell moved, so exercise displacement. And we have two ways of doing it. Either you measure the individual before and you put it into their sheets to where it calculates everything for them, or you just do averages. And while it might not be perfect, the idea that, a back squat is going to be relative to a lockout much greater. It takes that into account. And I think that there's the very athlete monitoring part to it of like, the more I know that what they're doing and how they're doing it and all that, but then also it is a great connection piece. It's a connection where they might not even be directly communicating with me, but in a way they are when they fill out their sheets. Yep.
Got to turn on our recording. So thank you, Guy, for sharing with us a little bit of how you do things and how you're coaching in this space in this time. We'll turn there and go to Dr. Ryan. And for those of you who don't know Dr. Ryan, as I said, he's the program director for the Center for Athletic Coaching Education within CPAS. He's also been a WSAC, West Virginia High School Secondary Schools Programs State Coach of the Year in cross country, and coaches cross country and track at Morgantown High School, and has for quite a while. So let him speak to you a little bit about what he's doing in this time.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, some great talks, some great advice from some great coaches and scientists out there. And I'm going to take a little different approach and yeah, kind of take it more from a high school where you obviously have concerns coming in, budgetary concerns coming in. You also have concerns about privacy issues. Since I deal with minors, what you can and cannot do on social media and what you should and should not do on social media is always a concern of mine. So I try to think about that when I am putting stuff up there. The first, it's actually more of it has an app associated with it, but it works best on a computer, is the teampages.com. I actually use this to run my high school program. So it has a free version, and it also has a paid version, and the paid version is $80 a year. So it's only the coach or the team will pay for it. So I find that it's definitely worth the $80 for me to pay for it. But what it does is I run my entire team off there. It's a way to communicate. I can easily send emails to the entire team. It comes from one source. What I found out was using my regular Gmail account, a lot of accounts would, because the list got so long, they would bounce back as junk mail. So this is a way that the parents, the athletes, they can sign into it. They can get my communications from a coach to the entire team. It allows me to do text messages. And this is based on the parents, the athletes, programming in their own phone numbers. So I don't put in phone numbers, but they can opt in to this where they can receive text messages. It also allows me to store all my team stuff, anything that I need. If you need forms to be filled out, I can have PDFs or Word documents put on there. So it's an easy repository that they can come back and pull that information when parents need it. It links to most calendars, so your Outlook or your iPhone calendar. So when I put an event on the website, and the parents or the athletes can sign up to have that connected to their smartphone or to their calendar, so it automatically populates. When I set things on the calendar, I can automatically send an email out telling parents. It helps me to track too, where athletes and parents can check, are you going to be here or you're not going to be there? So I can plan around who's planning on, if somebody can't be at a competition or can't be at a practice and those type of things. So it works great. And the nice thing about it is I can choose what is private and what is public. So that's where some of that protection is with some of the minors. Like there's a roster that's incorporated with the website, and you can put your name and phone number if you want to be contacted. Parents can do that, but that's only on the private side. I have to actually approve you as a member. So that kind of helps with some of the some of the issues of privacy that I deal with. The second one, I tried not to make this all running specific, but the second one is another great website that I've used in the past 2 years, or past 4 years actually, Running to Win, and it's 2, the number 2. There's a lot of sites out there that will track, what you run, and allow you to post it. The thing I like about this is it does have the security issue. Stiva or one of those other more social media sites, they don't quite do that. So you can have somebody that you may not want them looking where you're running, and they can see you're running at Kristen was just talking about this to me earlier with a cyclist. They can kind of get an idea of where you were and where you are. And we don't want anything like that happening. So the Running to Win site, the athletes will sign up for it. It is connected to, you can connect it to your GPS watches. A lot of my athletes have Garmin or the iPhone watch. You can get a Garmin watch or some type of GPS watch for right around $100. And I usually tell my parents that's something that's going to be a good investment if you're going to run. Take it seriously, take running seriously for years. So it will automatically download their run onto the Running to Win site, and then I can go in and see it. And that's something the athlete has to come in and click, who can and who cannot have access to their material. And I'm allowed to set it up as a team. So I'm working with just a team of athletes and not really everybody else. On the same note, and this is something where, Dr. Hornsby talked about this, and understanding where your athletes are at different points of the season. When my athletes are in season, I have a very good idea of where they are and what they're doing and those constant communications that I have. But as a high school coach, there are big blocks of time where I don't have that access to the athletes. So the Running to Win site is a great way that they can put on what they're doing in the off season, so that when practice starts, I know what they're capable of doing. I don't want to come in first day and tell everybody, let's go out for a 7-mile run, when the longest run you've done in the last month has been 3 miles. So I can monitor what they're doing, their progression, and get a good idea of exactly what type of overload they can handle when the season starts back up. Sort of on that same note, but not necessarily specific to running, athletemonitoring.com. This was another site that I've looked at, and I kind of played around with it for a while. It kind of brings in, and it's more centered on team sports. You can put it onto, obviously would work onto the cross-country setting, but it asks some of those self-wellness questions, which is really nice. So after a run or after a workout, I should say, the athlete can go on there and explain how they're feeling, both physically and emotionally. And that way you can sort of track some of that well-being of the athlete and hopefully monitor them as far as overtraining and overload and a lot of those parameters. Another one that is pretty universal amongst different sports, Coach My Video. This is a really simple app to use on any smartphone. I think right now Coach My Video is actually only on Apple devices. So it's not yet on Android devices. It's been around for a while, and I've used it on my iPhone. So I've had a lot of use with that over the years, a lot of practice with it. But what it allows me to do is to be able to video and give some type of video feedback to athletes really on the fly. I see they're doing something and they're maybe moving incorrectly. I can take a quick video. I can go back. I can do slow motion. I can add in angles of movement so that the athletes can see this. Within my runners, I use it a lot to look at hip displacement, to look at their knees. Are their knees, do we have too much internal rotation, which may suggest that now we're dealing with some type of strength issue. We need to go back into the weight room and work on hip strength and balance and coordination, those type of things. And then Coach Stratford mentioned this, and it's been my go-to software for many years, and that's Excel. I have basically run my entire program from programming workouts to running my roster to my budget, sort of everything on Excel, and I have all these Excel files. And I coach a team of about 60 high school athletes, and and we'll go to the track and we'll be doing a workout such as 8x800, and I have 60 kids on the track at the same time running 800-meter repeats at different times with different rest intervals. And I simply print out a couple Excel spreadsheets, and every time an athlete gets done with an interval, they walk over, they write down the split, what time they ran, and then at the end of the day, I have a sheet with all their times and all their splits, and I don't have enough coaches to go through and manually get all those splits throughout the entire workout. It does take a little time because now I have to go back and upload all that information actually type it into Excel. But I can use that, and I can track workouts, and I'll do this often. I'll run the same workout 3 different times at 3 different points of the year or the season, and I can show the athletes the improvement that they've had. You know, we've done this workout the second week of August, and we did it the second week of September, and then again as we're getting into our championship season in the second week of October, and show their progression and their improvement. And this has been a huge advantage to building confidence coming into championship part of my seasons. So yeah, like I said, I probably use Excel. The other nice thing about Excel is once you have your roster in Excel, you have all those names printed out, and you can convert those into Word documents. A lot of the meet entry software that I deal with as a track and cross country coach, I can cut and paste their names in there, so I'm not going through and typing in individual names. I have my roster already downloaded in that format. Thank you.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. You're giving me horrible flashbacks of my early days of track and field coaching with a little pad of paper, a little spiral, and a pencil, and trying to write down everything because there was no other way to record it when I first started out on my track and field coaching days. So, gosh, I wish we had computers back then. Well, thank you very much for that. And I wanted to add a little bit more before we open up to questions. I know I mentioned I'm the director of the center, but I've also been coaching for about 20 years. My primary coaching has been with endurance athletes from high school up through Olympic level, mostly on the bike, but I've worked with a number of runners over the years and have coached track and field at the high school and the collegiate levels as well. And some of the apps I wanted to share with you that I use quite a bit, and Map My Run was mentioned. There's also Map My Ride, which is a sister program, both of which are Under Armour programs now. As was mentioned, you need to be a little bit careful with those. The settings on those, you need to go in and make sure you're logging your settings in and making sure that you're making where you are at the moment private. It can be really useful tools that athletes can get accounts for free, and then can link coaches to or share with other people the things that they're doing. The one I use most often, however, to communicate with my athletes is one called Training Peaks, and I've used that probably since the early days when it was in its beta version, and have stayed with it over the years. But Training Peaks is a really nice one, again, that allows people to hook multiple different devices in and allows for lots of different charting and graphs. It was originally mostly cycling, but has grown to include the potential for rowing machines and running as well, as some of the technology has changed and grown. And I find it to be really useful and very intuitive for my athletes to use as well, so as we communicate. I also wanted to mention a couple of other things. One of the things I do right now with my athletes is trying to stay connected with them without making it all about the workouts, really thinking about how they can stay healthy and stay well. And so one of the sites I've been using a lot is USADA. The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency has a sister site called True Sport with a lot of nutrition and health and well-being information on it. Great time to be having conversations about sleep, nutrition, hydration, all those kinds of things. And I push articles to them to read, and then we come back and talk about them, and giving them some opportunities, or hey, read this, let me know if you have questions, to keep the connection, but not get them stressed out about how much they're working out or not working out. And I found that to be really useful. And then in my job with coaches, I do a lot of work with both coaches and with the athletes. And with coaches, one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of the coaches is they've got some extra time on their hands. And especially now as we get into the sort of the long days of this and we've passed the immediacy, and what do we do with some of our time? And one of the sites I like the best in terms of helping coaches who may not spend all of their days, knee deep in the journals and in the information, is a site that deals with infographics. And these infographics, I'll post the link over, and these are all being posted in the chat. YLM Sports Science, and they do a really nice job of making these really nice visual infographics of single articles or single topics that just make it really easy to quickly go through and sort of pull out the meat or the essential information that's provided in the articles. And so some really cool things. One thing I would like to do though before we go into questions and letting you guys sort of ask and pick the brain of some of the folks on the panel is just to remind people of a few key things. When we're talking about interfacing with athletes through social media, and we're talking about these apps and some of these kinds of things, it's really, really important that you give some time and energy to thinking about best practices for social media and setting these accounts up, particularly if your athletes are under 18. But as we heard Josh and Dan mention, almost any sport group that you're under is going to have some sort of compliance or some sort of athlete protection issues and concerns. And so be very mindful. Choose your platforms wisely. Make sure you know what their safety and security measures are. Think about how and why you need to do this and how you might be able to keep the work and the play separate. So your professional persona in these apps should be completely separate from any personal or private account that you have. You should have two distinct personalities, whether that's on Facebook, Twitter, or in any of these apps. So myself as an athlete, I have access to some of these apps we've been talking about, and I log and put in my runs and my rides and my training. I have a different login and a different account as a coach, just because of that need for keeping the lines very, very clear, especially for when I have younger athletes. Making sure you're creating that team presence. And if you set it up, it needs to be monitored, particularly as Mike was talking about. If you set up a forum where athletes can have conversation and you've set it up, you need to be making sure that there is someone, whether it's you or a parent on the team, monitoring that. And with these communication channels, make sure there are clear boundaries, the types of videos that get uploaded, the types of things that go into these chats, the type of conversation. Be very clear on if you're using social media, have rules about how you're following and what, if you're following someone who's under 18, you may want to think a little bit about, do you just follow everybody in your team on Twitter? Or do you only follow them with your professional account, things of that nature? Having that clear policy that's transparent, particularly to parents. I love some of the apps Mike was talking about, Sports Engine, and there's a few others out there that do the same thing, that make it a collective. And parents can opt out if they want, but it's a known collective, so everyone's getting that same information. Make sure you have parental consent and they know what apps and programs that you're using. And then making sure you stay away from individual chats, even with your adult or your athletes over 18. Those professional boundaries need to be very strong. As you're collecting data, looking at their data, as a high school coach or a college coach, you may also want to be thinking about what are the regulations for compliance and HIPAA, considering the data that you might be collecting. And if you're not sure about those things, check in with someone in those leadership positions, your athletic trainers or your ADs. Make sure you're not posting or tagging. So you never want to post a picture of an athlete or tag a picture of an athlete without permission in those social media places. And you certainly don't want to share any of the information that they are providing to you for training purposes without permission. And then don't assume that everybody on your team has access. One of the first things, hopefully, I heard something recently, which is an incredibly inside academic joke, but the idea of what we call Maslow before Bloom. We've got to make sure that their essential needs are taken care of, which is some work of a gentleman named Maslow, before we go into what are their performance needs, which is the work of Benjamin Bloom. And so we really, really need to make sure that as we're approaching distance training and distance coaching, that we're checking in and making sure that they're well first and that they're cared for before we start pushing them in any training platforms, checking to see what access they have. And one other thing I just like to have people be mindful of as they're thinking about coaching their athletes from a distance through apps and other platforms, they're doing so without supervision. And so we've got to be thinking about, are we making sure that we are comfortable enough that their form and the quality of what they're doing is there, while it's not being supervised. by someone who is an expert, such as yourself or your assistant coaches. So with that, I'd like to turn off that spotlight that I have on myself and bring us back to the larger group chat and a conversation. And if anybody has any questions at this time that they'd like to post over to anyone in the panel. It's been a silent chat over on the side. So if anybody has any questions about any of those specifics, or if anybody in the panel has had any additional thoughts sparked as we went through that they want to mention or highlight.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that last point you said, just about taking care of wellness before we go into the performance piece. A lot of us, work in some elite level of sport, and it doesn't matter what level, but the athletes that are operating at an elite level, and it's really easy for us as coaches to be like, we got to make sure we get that competitive advantage. But I think what you just said about the health and wellness, that has to be the center of every conversation right now. I've got this thought too, where it's funny, and it's been so long since I've read it. You'd be disappointed in me, Dr. D. I can't remember where this is from, but this idea that we don't share very well right now as coaches, because I got to guard, my practices for the competitive advantage. I think right now is a great opportunity to share. We need to get our athletes back on the field. We need to get them back on the court, because right now nobody's playing. So if we can center that conversation on health and wellness first, and then think about performance later, we'll have sport to come back to.
That's a really great point. And I won't dock you for not remembering your sources. Well, it looks like we do have a question over here. Let me read this off here. So for the first year high school coach that's only met half of the year's potential athletes, one time in, let's see, in West Virginia, where we have strict out-of-season coaching rules, what thoughts do you have about trying to get to know your potential athletes for the coming year, building a team environment? And Mike, I'm going to let you start there, because there are some pretty strict out-of-season rules, and I really appreciate that you as a coach know about those and are following those and thinking about those. I think that's important as well. So Mike, what would you sort of add to that?
Well, yes, the WVSAC for their high school and middle school athletes, just for people that aren't aware of them, in the state of West Virginia, you cannot work with your athletes doing sports-specific work outside of the season. Besides, there's 3 weeks in the summer, and then as of now, it's 6 flex days. So that's 6 days throughout the entire year that doesn't fit into your season, nor those 3 weeks of training in the summer. You can do conditioning work with your athletes. So you can set up things such as weight room sessions. And I do that pretty much year round with my athletes, is try to set up weight room sessions and try to get these driven by your upperclassmen on your teams. So they're the ones that, if you're, she says in here, a brand new coach, you might not know all your athletes, or ones that would be coming up. Those kids on your team, the ones you do know, they know the ones that want to be on the team, that are either coming up through the middle school ranks, or maybe are at the school and they're thinking about running or thinking about playing a sport. A lot of times kids get into it for the social aspect. So start asking around with the team, with the ones that you do know, and that you were able to build somewhat of a relationship with. Figure out who it is, or who their friends are that want to come out for the team and want to be a part of that. And then work on things such as conditioning, physical conditioning. You can meet with them in the weight room. You can do, cardiovascular type work. It just cannot be sport specific. So the team can kind of start to build that relationship. They'll start to build that relationship. They'll start to look at each other and know how much work each one is putting in. And you'll be surprised about when you get one person that I like to say that bug bites them, and they really start to become focused and dedicated, and they start to get better. The people around them, the younger kids, they'll see that and they'll want to come do the same thing. So I think a lot of coaches put too much emphasis really on being sports specific play and not on the physical conditioning side. So there are ways that you can still be involved with your athletes in the out of season. Posting having a website where you can post information to them about the upcoming season, about when when the 3 weeks of summer practices are, what your plan is for that. I try to put stuff out really in advance. This COVID-19 has kind of stopped me from doing a lot of that because I don't know where we're going to be in a couple months. But usually by this time I have my whole entire summer mapped out and sent out to my parents. So getting that type of information out there, kind of relying a little bit on your upperclassmen, and then thinking about what conditioning work can you do depending on what your particular sport is.
And there's a great follow-up question here that I was sort of thinking about myself, is thinking about this in current environment. What I would probably start with is first of all, talking with your AD and just making sure that you can apply some of this virtually. So can you have a general conditioning Zoom meeting where you just share with them some of the basic information because you haven't had a chance to talk to them in person? Can you create that Team Pages website where you might be posting not necessarily dates and times because that's so unknown right now, but hey, here's a favorite article I read about good nutrition, and while you may be a little bit more limited in them getting to know you, you can help create sort of their awareness of you and the trust in you and the fact that you're starting to look out for them and provide information, because you can't obviously have them go to the weight room right now and do some of those things. So I would check in with your AD and see about how they might allow you to apply a Zoom call or other platforms to get together and meet with your team in those allowable spaces, but in an alternative fashion other than in the gym.
Kristen, I'm going to step in a little bit too on that. From my understanding of it is we weren't allowed to have Zoom workouts to say, where coach steps on there and leads sort of a workout session. You can have conversations. I know I've been encouraged through my athletic administration here in Montague County to stay in contact with athletes, because that wellness side that Josh talked about, a lot of them are struggling with this and what's going on. So just to be that ear, to be that person that's there for them when they need help. But yeah, definitely, as Kristen said, talk to your athletic director, talk to your local school board about what you can and cannot do as far as practices and what is considered conditioning versus sport specific type work.
And if you're allowed to have some sort of team page where parents and students can all communicate, you can do some things that are more on the team building side and the team connection side. Things as silly as, we were talking to someone at US Lacrosse the other day and having a coach do a team mascot bake-off, and everybody on the team was going to bake something that looked like the mascot and then share the picture. And it was not at all about training. It was about the connection. And either the video of them making it or if you've ever seen any of the failed it kind of horrible baking show things, it was that idea for a team. Something you could do to just help connect them in this time of uncertainty, which certainly is affecting our athletes.
In terms of communicating with your athletes and an idea for something to talk about other than training, and one of the things I remind myself with the push, the focus of the health, the well-being, all that, there's sometimes it's probably good, they might get to a point where they hear that so much they almost tune it out, or and so my coach when I was a thrower was really big into, I remember the first day of practice, my coach at the end of practice asked me a couple questions about hammer throw, and I didn't know any of them, and she was very not happy with me. And the next practice she gave me it was a good 50 some pages, and it was the history of the hammer. And something I found myself communicating more and more on is stuff dealing with the history of the sport. And weightlifting is certainly a sport that isn't covered all that much. It's not on ESPN or any of that. But I can tell you from having students that are into sports that are more popular, like a football, basketball, baseball, soccer, our students don't, even if it's, even if it's their sport, they tend to not know a whole lot about the history of their sports either. And so, little things here and there, whether it's the development of women's weightlifting, whether it's going back to the ancient Olympics, the early Olympics when weightlifting looked very different, any of that type of stuff, I think is kind of fun stuff it's relevant to the sport, but it's mostly just to have a conversation.
Thank you. And I know we're running sort of close to the end of the hour here, so I wanted to real quickly share with everyone. Just let me pull this over so you can see the part that matters. We have all of the sites that everybody mentioned today that will be up on the, they'll be up on the end of the video. So if anybody's got any questions, they can find them very easily here. And I also wanted to mention that we do have a continuing town hall series that we'll be doing with talking to some different people about building and supporting resiliency in athletes, including WVU gymnastics coach Jason Butts, as well as a few other folks that work directly with athletes and coaches on how to do that within our athletes. And it's an amazing time to be talking about that, knowing that we're facing current challenges and sport is full of challenges. That's the nature of sport. And how do we help build this, what we call mental flexibility, to handle and roll with all of these different things. And it's such an amazing time to step back and do a little bit of that work. And then we'll be moving into a part of the series that will round out our spring series and finish it up, where we're looking at long-term athleticism through youth sport and how do we do that, and then rounding it out with returning to play. And all those links are available on the appliedcoaching.wvu.edu website. And I wanted to also take a moment here to thank our speakers, Dan Stratford, Josh Nelson, Guy Hornsby, and Mike Ryan, and thank everybody for the time they put in, and thank all of you who listened in and participated. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Be safe.
Thank you, guys. Good to see everybody.
Yes.